How's it going, everybody? In this video, I'm going to be discussing what someone should do and should not do after a self-defense shooting. So let's talk about it. So real quick, although I am a licensed and practicing attorney in the state of California, this in no way is legal advice. I'm not offering you legal advice. I am not your attorney. If you have a specific factual issue or something has arisen in your specific case, you should definitely reach out to someone in your local area. These are just my general thoughts, takeaways, and a lot of people ask me, especially what's been going on right now, within our society and also some very high profile cases, a lot of people are asking me what they should do and should not do after a self-defense shooting. So I thought I would put out this video just giving you my general thoughts about what I would recommend to maybe like my friends who ask me that question and what I would say to them. So first and foremost, what you need to understand is that what happens after a defensive shooting is some of the most critical things, and it's ultimately going to determine whether you find yourself sitting in jail or whether you get to ultimately go home. And it is also going to determine whether a prosecutor will try to actually prosecute you and prosecute you for doing something wrong, or if they'll leave you alone. So first, let's talk about that time period between the defensive shooting and the police actually responding. As many of you are familiar, it takes on average about 10 minutes for police to respond. So this time period between the defensive shooting and the police responding is a very critical time period. So first and foremost, during this period of response time, what you should make sure first is that all threats are clear and that you are safe. Depending on the circumstances that you find yourself in, let's say if you're in your house, there may be more than one individual who are breaking into your house or more than one individual who's in your house, and that kind of has resulted in this defensive shooting. Or maybe you're outside of the house and something has happened. There may be more than one individual or more than one attacker. So just because you've cleared one threat, of course, you don't want to just assume that you're safe. So make sure that all threats are clear, and then you can address your weapon. So then let's talk about, after you've cleared all of these threats, what do you do with your weapon, or what would I recommend you do with your weapon? One of the things that I would not recommend is, a lot of people say, well, go ahead and reholster your weapon and put it away. To me, that's a little bit dangerous, especially depending on the circumstances. So if you're out in public, it may be good practice to reholster your weapon, because let's say if you're in a local Walmart and police show up, you don't want to be having your weapon waving about willy-nilly. So in that circumstance, it may be a good idea to reholster your weapon. But if in your house, it may not be as good of an idea, because you can do other things with that weapon to make sure it's secure to where it's not hidden on your body. So in that circumstance, I would recommend that you just clear the weapon, make sure there's no ammunition in it anymore, make sure that the magazine is out of it, and then put it down somewhere where it's in clear view. One of the worst things in any of these circumstances that you would want is that when police actually do respond and actually do come on the scene, then you get shot by them because you're handling your weapon or something like that. That is one of the worst things that could happen, and really defeats the purpose of the defensive shooting if you ultimately end up getting shot and killed by the police responding. The next thing, after you've made sure that all threats are clear and that you've actually dealt with the weapon itself, is make sure you call the police. And really what we call this is the race to report. You should make sure that your story is the first story that the police hear. What you don't want is some bystander or witness or someone else, maybe your neighbor, calling the police saying, I heard gunshots, or I saw this individual shoot this other individual, there's someone here with a gun, and then the police officers come onto the scene not knowing that you are the good guy, that you, although you had a weapon and you deployed it, are the good guy. So you want to actually call them and let them know that you are the good guy, that you do have a weapon, and please pretty much don't shoot you when they respond. Now, one of the nuances I want to talk about here when actually dialing 911 and calling the police and letting them know that you are the good guy, and that when they respond, they should expect a good guy with a weapon, is that if possible, you actually yourself don't want to call the police. And in my view, if let's say your wife's there, or you have a family member there, or if there's a witness who knows that you're the good guy, if they can call the police for themselves, report what they saw, that is better than you yourself calling the police and actually then putting your voice on a voice recorder and them asking you questions about what happened. Because remember, although you may think that the police are on your side and that you're the good guy and you are in the right, everything that you say, including that 911 call recording, can and will be used against you if something were to happen where a DA gets a hold of this case and tries to prosecute you. So if you call the operator and you're talking to them and you're going on in tangents about what happened, and maybe you get something wrong during this actual 911 call or something like that, that can be used against you, and a DA can grasp onto that to try to prosecute you. So just keep that in mind. It may be best practice for you to have someone else call on your behalf and relay what they saw and not necessarily what you saw or anything like that, but at least report that what they saw and that you're the good guy with a firearm and that the police need to respond because there's been a shooting. But let's say there's not another individual there, there's not another witness or bystander who saw you do something, and you have to call 911 for yourself. You need to just call 911, report what happened in short, simple, factual terms. Don't elaborate, don't go on tangents. I know it's going to be a very high stress situation. I hope I never find myself in this type of situation, and I really hope none of my viewers ever find themselves in this type of situation, because it is going to be hard to not go on tangents when you're talking to an operator. And a lot of their goal is to keep you on the phone and ask you questions and try to gather as much detail as possible. But really, that is bad for you, because the more stuff that you have on recording can ultimately harm you. And really, the best practice is to stay silent and get an attorney. Another thing you should do while you're on 911 is request medical assistance, especially if maybe you're harmed or someone else was harmed. Now, obviously, if you shot someone, they're harmed, but if they need medical assistance, like they actually haven't passed away at that point, request medical assistance, because that, again, is being recorded, and so it can be used as evidence on your behalf to let people know, like, I wasn't this bloodthirsty individual. I let them know that I was harmed, other people were harmed, and we need medical assistance. I'm not just out there trying to kill a bunch of people. I was actually trying to help people, and I was simply just defending my life. I found myself in this situation where I had to defend my life, but when all was said and done, I actually was trying to help other individuals as well. Another thing to consider during this period where police have not yet responded is that you do not want to go around talking to other bystanders or witnesses during this period. It's going to be very hard not to, because I'm sure people who maybe saw you defend your life or something like that, they're going to want to come up and talk to you, or they're going to want to relay to other people or to you what they saw as well. But really, you don't want to either taint them what they saw, and you don't want them to taint what you saw. And also, you don't want to say something to them which they then relay to someone else and can be used against you. And now that might deal with some hearsay stuff, but what you don't want is to relay some information to someone else that will ultimately be used against you. So now let's talk about what exactly you should do or not do when police actually respond on the scene. And this is probably one of the more critical aspects of anything, because like I mentioned, you may think that since you're the good guy, you were in a defensive shooting, you're completely justified in what you did, the police will be on your side, but that's not necessarily always the case. Police responding, one, may not actually agree that you are 100% justified, and a lot of their job is to gather information. And so that's exactly what they will be trying to do, is they will be trying to gather as much information about the scenario as they can from you. And so because of this, you need to be very, very careful about what you say to the police once they respond. And I cannot reiterate this enough. Be very careful about what you say. The police are likely going to ask you a myriad of questions like, how many rounds did you shoot? What did you see? Did they have a weapon? Do you have a CCW? I mean, they could ask you any and all questions. Now, keep in mind, you are not obligated to answer these questions, but they will probably push you on these questions, and they will also probably try to say that you have an obligation to answer these questions, but you are not necessarily obligated to answer these questions. And actually, what I would say here in this circumstance is you could relay very specific factual things like I mentioned. I don't know, I was at my house, someone broke in, I saw he had a gun, I was in fear for my life, so I shot. And also along these lines, you might just want to simply point out evidence to the police officers like, there's my weapon, there's the attacker's weapon, or there's the attacker's gun that he had, or there's the attacker's knife that he had, or he broke that window. You just want to point the evidence to them so that they can make sure they gather it so that nothing is missed in your case. But beyond that, you don't want to say a whole lot to the police other than very simple factual things. Then you should request that you do not want to answer any more questions until you speak to an attorney. And at this point, once you say, I want to speak with my attorney or I want an attorney, what then happens is that the police have to pretty much disengage. They can no longer ask you any questions because you've requested an attorney. what's going to happen is there's going to be a lot of high stress, adrenaline going on at this time, and you might not have all the facts kind of laid out in your brain, and you might want some time to disengage, calm down, relax, gather your story the way that you saw it, and actually talk to an attorney about it so that you can outline exactly what happened in the best factual light for yourself. Because what can actually happen, and happens a lot, is people start talking to police officers and saying things that they perceived or saw, or they might even get something completely factually wrong, and they will regret down the road saying something. For example, they might say, oh, I saw this guy break in and I saw he had something shiny. I thought it was a shiny knife, and that's why I felt in threat for my life and I shot him. But then come to find out the individual didn't have maybe a shiny knife. They maybe just had like a blacked out knife or something like that. And then a prosecutor can say, well, how did you see something shiny when it was completely black? Like you can see there, they can start to twist your words, and even more egregious things like maybe you say you're out in public and say I was on X street and this happened, and then maybe you come to find out you actually weren't on that specific street, or that individual wasn't on that street, or something like that. So in these high stress situations, you can completely give yourself a bad foundation because you misstate something, or you perceived something wrong and then you state it wrong, and then those words get used against you down the road. So like I mentioned, when in doubt, just be quiet, don't say anything, and talk to an attorney. Also, once the police respond, what's probably going to happen is they will ask for your consent to search your house, search the area, or maybe if they're not at your house, or maybe if it involves your car or something like that, they're gonna request consent to search the area that might involve this type of shooting. Now, what I always tell people is never consent to a search. If the police actually want to search something, they should get a warrant. In these types of scenarios, they might have probable cause to search the rest of the house, but generally you should never consent to search because it can get yourself in a lot of trouble. And what you actually don't want to do, especially when we're talking about here in the state of California, what could end up happening is, let's say you have a defensive shooting, maybe involving in your house. They ask for consent to search the rest of your house. You give them consent to search the rest of your house, like I mentioned, is a horrible idea. And then maybe they go around searching your house and maybe they find a weapon that's not California compliant, or that they think is not California compliant, or like we saw recently in the city of Tulare in the Peng Yang case, where they find a magazine that holds more than 10 rounds, and then they try to say that you're in possession of a large capacity magazine, and then try to prosecute you with a different charge, like violating some sort of California gun law. So like I mentioned, never consent to search. They probably will try to search anyways, or will search anyways, but never consent to a search. And so the next thing I want to talk about is your arrest. And one of the things that you should be mentally prepared to actually deal with is that if you find yourself in a self-defense shooting like this, the likelihood is that you will be arrested. You will be taken to the police department and you will probably sit in jail at least for a little bit. And once you're arrested, like you see on cops, your Miranda rights kick in. So you have a right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in court of law, stuff like that. So at that point, you definitely should already have that position, like I mentioned, where you should not be talking to the police. You need to remain silent as much as you can. And also you should have already requested your right to an attorney. But definitely, if you haven't done that by this point where you're actually physically arrested, you should be quiet and actually say, I want an attorney. You actually have to advocate for yourself and say, I want a right to an attorney before that kicks in. Police department ultimately has to make a decision. They're either going to book you and release you, or they're going to book you and retain you. So that's kind of the determination they have to make, and it's going to probably depend on the area that you find yourself in. And whether you're released or detained, it's pretty much going to be ultimately up to probably the local demographics, I guess is the easiest way to say that. It's going to depend on whether you find yourself in a liberal area or conservative area, where the police department maybe is less favorable to firearms or more favorable to firearms. And so what will happen is, if they actually do decide to release you, they'll release you, but pretty much tell you, like what you see on TV all the time, like, don't leave town, don't do this, don't do that. You need a number that we can contact you because we're going to try to bring you in to ask you more questions, stuff like that. So just something to keep in mind, that just because you were in the right, you probably still will be arrested, and you might find yourself sitting in jail until you maybe are prosecuted or something like that. So just be mentally prepared. Now, one of the last things I want to mention is actually talking to your attorney. And this is just from my perspective. A lot of people are very afraid to talk to attorneys, or especially when it deals with very sensitive subjects like this, they're afraid to say certain things to their attorneys. What you need to keep in mind is that when speaking with your attorney, you need to be completely candid. You need to give them all the information that you possibly have so that your attorney can set up the strategy and properly figure out how they're going to defend you and get you out of this situation. Also, what I want to mention is that once you're talking with your attorney, there is attorney-client privilege, so they cannot release this information, this confidential information that you've given them. Now, once you've talked to your attorney, you should let your attorney do all the talking for you. Whenever the police reach out to you, refer them to your attorney. And from there, the best advice I can give you is to lay low. Don't go posting on social media accounts. Don't go doing news interviews. Don't do anything like that. Lay low. You should pretty much just disappear into the ether. You don't want your face being out there a lot. I'm sure you're going to have plenty of media sources doing that for you, but you just need to lay low. Don't be making statements. Don't be letting people make statements on your behalf. Just lay low, stay quiet, and let your attorney handle it. So what I also want to mention is that it's probably a good idea, especially if you have a concealed weapon or if you're ever concerned about finding yourself in one of these defensive situations, is to have some sort of legal protection / carry insurance. Now, the one I recommend a lot is USCCA. That is the one that I'm kind of affiliated with. That's the one I believe in. That's the one I have. There are a lot of other companies out there that do great things. They have great programs out there as well, but USCCA is just the one that I recommend. And I'll put a link down in the comment section, the details section, if you're interested in looking at some of their plans and signing up. But it is a good idea to have a legal protection like USCCA or some of these other companies out there, is because a bond could easily be set against you, let's say in the amount of $100,000, which isn't a whole lot if they actually think that you went out and murdered someone. $100,000 bond, I don't know about you, but a lot of people don't have $100,000 just sitting in their bank accounts that they can pay that bond on. But if you have one of these programs where you paid into the membership, you have the membership, you have a certain amount of legal protection, a company like USCCA will take and pay your bond, and so that you are actually out of jail. And so if you couldn't pay that bond, what's going to probably end up happening is you're going to sit in jail for up to 12 months while your case processes. So I don't know about you, but I would rather be out of jail for 12 months than sitting in jail waiting for my case to kind of make it through its procedural requirements. So just something to keep in mind, where one of these types of legal protection programs like USCCA may be a good idea. So what did we learn from this video, and what is the main takeaway? Like I mentioned, the main takeaway you should have from this is probably twofold. One, be quiet and don't say anything. And two, ask for your attorney. Your first thing should don't say anything. And if you do say something, the only thing that should be coming out of your mouth is, I want an attorney, I want to talk to my attorney. Those should be your two main takeaways. And if you do that, it should keep you from saying something that will ultimately be used against you. And that is one of the worst things that could happen, is that you defend your life through a defensive shooting like this, but you find yourself in jail for the rest of your life. That is one of the worst things that could happen. So if you have any questions that maybe I didn't address in this video, go ahead and write down in the comment section below. Like I mentioned, none of this is legal advice, but I usually moderate those comment sections. So if I see some good questions down there, I go ahead and answer them. Also, if you like this video and you like to support the channel, one of the best ways to do that is join the Patreon page, and I'll go ahead and put a link to the Patreon page down in the details. Also, just like, commenting, subscribing, and make sure you hit that notification bell, because that helps us spread the word about the Second Amendment, helps us spread videos like this that are critical information that people probably need, especially with the things that are going on in our society right now. So as always, thanks you guys for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And never forget, this nation was built by armed scholars, and this nation will be maintained by armed scholars.